Sarah Martinez stared at the rejection letter in her trembling hands. The words blurred together as tears threatened to spill from her exhausted eyes. Another job opportunity lost, another door slammed shut in her face. She crumpled the letter and tossed it toward the overflowing trash can in the corner of her cramped apartment, missing by several inches. The single mother of two had been unemployed for 8 months now. Her savings account showed a balance that made her stomach churn with anxiety. Rent was due in 3 days and she had exactly $47 to her name. The electricity bill sat unopened on her kitchen table, a bright red final notice stamp glaring at her like an accusation. Her children, Emma and Jake, ages 7 and 9, sat quietly in their shared bedroom, playing with worn-out toys they'd had for years. They had learned not to ask for new things anymore, sensing their mother's constant worry without fully understanding its depth. Emma's shoes had holes that Sarah tried to patch with duct tape, while Jake's school backpack was held together with safety pins and determination. Sarah walked to the window of their second-floor apartment and gazed down at the bustling street below. People hurried past with purpose, briefcases in hand, heading to jobs that provided security she could only dream of. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. It had started when the small accounting firm where she worked for 6 years suddenly downsized. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal. But it felt deeply personal when she watched her coworkers pack their belongings into cardboard boxes, their faces reflecting the same shock and fear she felt in her own chest. The divorce from David had been finalized just 2 months before she lost her job. He had promised to help with child support, but his payments came sporadically, if at all. His new life with his younger girlfriend apparently didn't leave room for consistent responsibility toward his children. Sarah had stopped counting on him months ago, but the bitter disappointment still stung. She had applied to hundreds of jobs, from high-end accounting positions to entry-level clerical work. Each interview seemed promising until they asked about her employment gap or her availability for overtime. Being a single mother with limited childcare options made her seem unreliable to potential employers, despite her stellar work history and dedication. The sound of her phone buzzing pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw her sister Lisa's name. Sarah hesitated before answering, knowing Lisa would ask how the job search was going, and Sarah wasn't ready to admit how desperate things had become. "Hey sis," Sarah answered, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "Sarah, how did the interview go yesterday?" Lisa's concern was evident even through the phone. "They went with someone else," Sarah replied simply, not trusting herself to say more without breaking down. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, you know Tom and I have that extra room. The kids could share and you could stay with us until you get back on your feet." The offer was generous, but Sarah's pride rebelled against the idea. She had always been independent, always figured things out on her own. Moving in with her sister felt like admitting defeat, like failing not just herself but her children too. "Thanks, Lisa, but we're managing. Something will come up soon." After ending the call, Sarah sat down at her laptop and opened her email. More rejections filled her inbox, each one feeling like a personal attack on her worth as a person. She had excellent references, years of experience, and genuine enthusiasm for work, but none of it seemed to matter in a job market that favored youth and flexibility over experience and dedication. The apartment felt smaller each day, the walls closing in as her options dwindled. She had sold everything of value weeks ago: her grandmother's jewelry, the few pieces of good furniture she owned, even her car. They relied on public transportation now, which made job interviews even more challenging when they required her to travel across town. Emma appeared in the doorway holding her favorite stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. The toy's fur was matted and one ear hung by a thread, but Emma refused to let Sarah throw it away. "Mommy, are you sad?" Emma asked with the intuitive wisdom that children possess. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and smiled. "Just tired, sweetheart." "Are you and Jake hungry?" She opened the refrigerator and surveyed its sparse contents. A carton of eggs with 3 left, some wilted lettuce, a container of leftover rice from 2 days ago, and a nearly empty jar of peanut butter. She could make the eggs last for dinner tonight, but tomorrow would require creativity. She wasn't sure she possessed any more. As evening fell, Sarah tucked her children into their beds, reading them a story from a library book they'd renewed 3 times. Their innocent faces looked up at her with complete trust, believing that she would always take care of them, always find a way to make things work. That faith both strengthened and terrified her. Later, alone in her own bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling and tried to formulate a plan. Traditional job searching wasn't working. Her resume, despite her best efforts to craft it perfectly, seemed to disappear into digital black holes. Phone calls went unreturned, and networking events required money she didn't have for appropriate clothing or transportation. She thought about her skills beyond accounting. She was organized, creative when necessary, good with people when given the chance. She could clean houses, babysit other people's children, deliver food, anything to bring an income. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The sound of her upstairs neighbor's television filtered through the thin walls, a constant reminder that life continued normally for everyone else, while hers felt suspended in uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring another day of job searching, another day of stretching resources that were already stretched beyond their limits. But something deep inside Sarah refused to give up entirely. Her children needed her to succeed, needed her to find a way forward. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she made a quiet promise to herself that she would try a different approach tomorrow. Conventional methods had failed, but perhaps it was time to think outside the box, to be creative, in ways she had never considered before. The next morning brought no miraculous solutions, only the harsh reality of an empty coffee jar and 2 children who needed breakfast. Sarah stood in her kitchen, calculating how to make their remaining food last until she could figure out their next meal. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual as she scrambled the last 3 eggs and divided them between Emma and Jake. "Mommy, can I have juice?" Jake asked, not knowing that the carton in the refrigerator had been empty for 2 days. "Water is better for you, honey," Sarah replied, filling his cup from the tap and hoping the cheerfulness in her voice masked her growing desperation. While the children ate, Sarah scrolled through job listings on her phone, her thumb moving mechanically. As she scanned the same positions she'd applied for weeks ago, the routine had become numbing, but she continued because stopping felt like giving up entirely. A knock at the door interrupted her mindless searching. Sarah's heart jumped, immediately thinking of the rent notice that would surely come soon. Instead, she found Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor from across the hall, holding a covered dish. "I made too much soup again," Mrs. Chen said with a knowing smile that suggested this wasn't entirely true. "Would you help me by taking some?" The kindness nearly brought Sarah to tears. Mrs. Chen had been subtly helping for weeks, always with excuses that preserved Sarah's dignity. Sometimes it was extra bread from the bakery that would go bad, other times leftover vegetables from her garden that she claimed she couldn't use in time. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That's very thoughtful." The older woman patted Sarah's arm gently. "Hard times don't last forever, dear, but good people do." After Mrs. Chen left, Sarah sat at her small dining table and opened her laptop with renewed determination. Instead of searching job boards, she decided to research something different. She had been thinking about Mrs. Chen's words all morning, about good people in hard times, and an idea had begun to form. Sarah started researching local food banks and community organizations. If she was struggling this much, surely other families were facing similar challenges. As she read about various charitable efforts, she noticed something interesting. Most of the organizations had websites that looked outdated, social media pages that were rarely updated, and donation systems that seemed complicated for potential contributors. Her accounting background had given her experience with small business finances, and she had always been naturally good with computers and organization. What if she could help these organizations run more efficiently, while earning some income for her family? Sarah spent hours researching, making notes, and developing what felt like the first real plan she'd had in months. She identified 12 local charities that appeared to need help with basic administrative tasks, financial organization, or digital presence. Some had Facebook pages with posts from years ago. Others had websites that didn't work properly on mobile phones. By afternoon, she had crafted personalized emails to each organization, not asking for employment, but offering her services as a volunteer coordinator or consultant. She explained her situation honestly but focused on what she could offer rather than what she needed. Her approach was professional but personal, highlighting her accounting skills and her genuine understanding of community struggles. The response was faster than any job application she'd submitted. Within 2 hours, she received a call from Maria Santos, who ran a local food distribution center. "Sarah, I read your email, and honestly, it's like an answer to prayer. We're drowning in paperwork, and our volunteer coordination is a disaster. We can't pay much, but we might be able to work something out." They arranged to meet the next day. Sarah hung up feeling more hopeful than she had in months, but also terrified. This wasn't a traditional job with guaranteed income, but it was an opportunity to create something meaningful while addressing her family's needs. That evening, as she helped Emma and Jake with their homework at the kitchen table, Sarah explained that she might be starting some new work soon. "Will you have to work at night like Daddy did?" Emma asked, referring to David's frequent business trips that had contributed to their marriage's deterioration. "No, sweetheart. This work would be about helping people in our community. People who might be having tough times like us." Jake looked up from his math worksheet. "Like Mrs. Chen helps us?" "Exactly like that, Jake." The next morning, Sarah dressed in her best interview outfit, which had seen more use in recent months than she cared to admit. The food distribution center was located in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. She took 2 buses to get there, arriving 15 minutes early despite the complicated journey. Maria Santos greeted her warmly, a woman in her 50s whose energy seemed to fill the entire building. She led Sarah through the operation, showing her rooms filled with donated food, clothing, and household items. Volunteers sorted through donations, but their efforts seemed chaotic and uncoordinated. "We have amazing people who want to help," Maria explained, "but we're terrible at organization. Volunteers show up not knowing what to do, donations get misplaced, and our record keeping is honestly embarrassing." Sarah could see the problems immediately. There was no system for tracking inventory, no schedule for volunteers, no clear process for intake or distribution. Her accounting mind began automatically organizing solutions. "I could create systems for all of this," Sarah said, her excitement building. "Volunteer scheduling software, inventory tracking, even a simple website where people could see what donations you need most." Maria's eyes lit up. "That sounds incredible, but Sarah, I have to be honest about money. We operate on such a tight budget. What if we started with a trial period? I could volunteer for 2 weeks, set up basic systems, and show you the impact. If it helps your operation, maybe we could work out a small stipend or hourly rate." Maria agreed immediately. They shook hands on the arrangement, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about work. This wasn't just about earning money, though that was desperately needed. This was about using her skills to help people while helping herself. On the bus ride home, Sarah's mind raced with ideas. She could streamline their donation process, create volunteer training materials, even help them apply for grants more effectively. Her accounting skills were valuable, but more than that, her recent experience with struggle gave her insight into what community members really needed. That night, after putting the children to bed, Sarah sat at her laptop and began creating organizational charts and process flows. For the first time in months, she worked late, not out of desperation, but out of genuine enthusiasm. She was designing something that could make a real difference while potentially solving her own problems. As she worked, she realized that her approach had fundamentally changed. Instead of begging for opportunities, she was creating them. Instead of focusing on what she lacked, she was leveraging what she could offer. The shift felt profound and empowering. Sarah's first week at the food distribution center flew by in a blur of activity and discovery. She arrived each morning with notebooks full of ideas and stayed late organizing systems that had been neglected for years. The work was physically demanding and emotionally intense, but she felt more energized than she had since losing her corporate job. Maria introduced her to the other volunteers, a diverse group of people who came from all walks of life. There was Tom, a retired teacher who sorted donated books, Patricia, a nurse who volunteered on her days off, and Carlos, a construction worker whose own family had once needed the center's services. Each person had their own story, their own reasons for giving back to the community. Sarah quickly realized that her accounting skills were just the beginning of what this place needed. The volunteers were passionate but lacked coordination. Donations arrived randomly, sometimes overwhelming the small staff, other times leaving shelves nearly empty. The distribution process was inefficient, causing families to wait in long lines for basic necessities. She started by creating simple systems, a check-in sheet for volunteers that matched their skills with daily needs, an inventory tracking system that helped them understand which donations were most needed and which they had in abundance, a scheduling system that prevented either overcrowding or understaffing on different days. By Thursday of her first week, the improvements were already noticeable. Maria pulled Sarah aside during lunch break, which they ate sitting on folding chairs between stacks of canned goods. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. We processed 30% more families yesterday than we usually do, and everyone seemed less stressed about it." "It's just about creating structure," Sarah replied, though internally she was thrilled by the recognition. Once people know what to expect and how things work, everything flows better. "I want to talk about compensation. We can't offer much, but I think we can manage $15 an hour for 20 hours a week to start. Would that help?" Sarah nearly cried with relief. $300 a week wouldn't solve all their problems, but it would cover groceries and utilities while she continued building something larger. More importantly, it was work that felt meaningful, work that aligned with her values and utilized her skills effectively. That Friday afternoon, Sarah was organizing the clothing donation area when a familiar voice made her turn around. David stood near the entrance, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his expensive suit. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" The question stung because of its implications. David knew about her job loss, knew about their financial struggles, but seeing her at a community center seemed to surprise him. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I work here now. I help coordinate operations and volunteer management." David glanced around the busy center, taking in the organized chaos of people helping people. "This is where you're working now? Sarah, I could help you find something more suitable. My company is always looking for qualified accountants." The offer might have been tempting months ago, but now it felt condescending. Sarah realized that David's definition of suitable work was based on prestige and salary rather than purpose and impact. "This work is perfectly suitable, David. I'm helping families who are struggling, and I'm using my skills in ways that matter." "But the money, Sarah. How are you supporting Emma and Jake with this kind of job?" The question revealed how little David understood about their actual situation. His sporadic child support payments suggested he wasn't particularly concerned about their financial stability most of the time. "We're managing just fine," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "The children are learning important lessons about community and helping others." David left looking puzzled and slightly disappointed, as if her choice to do meaningful work was somehow a reflection on his own priorities. After he was gone, Sarah realized she didn't feel angry or hurt by the encounter. Instead, she felt proud of the path she was creating for herself and her children. That weekend, Sarah brought Emma and Jake to the center during her Saturday volunteer shift. She wanted them to understand her new work environment and to see the community they were now part of. Both children were curious and helpful, with Emma organizing children's books by reading level and Jake helping sort donated toys. "Mommy, why do people give their things away?" Emma asked while carefully arranging picture books. "Because they want to help other families who might need those things more than they do," Sarah explained. "It's a way of showing love to people we might not even know." Jake held up a toy truck that was still in its original packaging. "Someone bought this and never even played with it." "Maybe they bought it to help a child who couldn't afford a new toy," Sarah suggested. "Sometimes the best gifts are the ones we give to strangers." Patricia, the volunteer nurse, overheard their conversation and joined them. "Your mom is doing really important work here, you know. She's helping us help a lot more people than we could before." That afternoon, as they rode the bus home, Emma leaned against Sarah's shoulder and said quietly, "I like your new job, Mommy. It makes you smile again." The observation was more perceptive than Sarah had realized. She had been smiling more, feeling more optimistic about their future. The work at the center had given her more than income. It had restored her sense of purpose and competence. Sunday evening, Sarah sat at her laptop researching grant opportunities for the center. She had discovered that many charitable organizations received significant funding, but the application processes were complex and time-consuming. This was another area where her organizational skills and attention to detail could make a real difference. She found several grants specifically designed for food security programs, emergency assistance funds, and volunteer coordination initiatives. The applications required detailed financial projections, program descriptions, and impact measurements. Exactly the kind of work that utilized her accounting background and analytical skills. Sarah drafted a proposal to present to Maria and the center's board of directors. She wanted to expand her role to include grant writing and program development. If she could secure even one significant grant, it would not only help the center serve more families but also demonstrate her value as something more than a part-time coordinator. As she worked on the proposal, Sarah realized how much her perspective had changed over the past month. She was no longer thinking like someone desperately seeking employment, but like someone building a career around her values and strengths. The distinction felt profound. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "How's the new job going?" Instead of the evasive responses she'd given for months, Sarah replied honestly, "It's incredible. Hard work, but I'm helping families while supporting my own. I feel like myself again." Lisa called immediately. "Sarah, you sound different. Happier." "I am happier. This work matters, Lisa. I'm not just processing numbers for someone else's profit. I'm creating systems that help people feed their families." "That's wonderful, but are you earning enough to be stable?" "We're getting there," Sarah replied, "and I have ideas for expanding my role that could make this sustainable long-term." After the call, Sarah returned to her grant research with renewed energy. She was no longer just surviving day by day, but planning for a future that felt both realistic and exciting. The center had given her more than a job. It had given her a platform to build something meaningful. 3 months into her work at the center, Sarah's transformation was remarkable. She had not only stabilized her family's immediate needs, but had also begun to build something much larger than she initially imagined. Her grant writing efforts had yielded their first success, a $15,000 award for expanding volunteer training programs. And suddenly everyone was paying attention to the quiet accountant who had revolutionized their operations. The success brought unexpected opportunities. Maria asked Sarah to present their improved systems at a regional conference of community service organizations. Other centers began reaching out for consultation on their own organizational challenges. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being sought after for her expertise rather than desperately seeking anyone who would listen. The morning of the conference, Sarah stood in front of her closet trying to decide what to wear. Her interview outfit had served faithfully but felt inadequate for presenting to an audience of nonprofit directors and community leaders. Emma appeared in the doorway, sensing her mother's anxiety. "You should wear the blue dress, Mommy. It makes your eyes sparkle." Sarah smiled and pulled out the blue dress she'd forgotten she owned. Emma was right. It did make her feel more confident and professional. As she got ready, Sarah reflected on how different this nervous energy felt from the anxiety of job interviews. This was excitement mixed with purpose rather than desperation mixed with fear. The conference was held at a hotel downtown, a space that would have intimidated Sarah just months earlier. Now she walked through the lobby carrying her presentation materials with quiet confidence. She understood the value of her work because she had seen its impact firsthand. Her presentation went better than she had dared to hope. The audience of nonprofit leaders asked detailed questions about her systems, requested copies of her organizational templates, and several people approached her afterward about consulting opportunities. Dr. Williams, who directed the regional United Way office, was particularly interested in her approach. "Sarah, your model could be replicated across dozens of organizations in our network. Have you considered developing this into a consulting practice?" The suggestion had never occurred to her, but as Dr. Williams explained the scope of organizational challenges facing small nonprofits, Sarah began to see possibilities she hadn't imagined. Many community organizations struggled with the same issues she had addressed at the food center: inefficient systems, volunteer coordination problems, inadequate record keeping, and grant application difficulties. "I'd need to maintain my current position," Sarah explained, "but I might be able to take on additional projects. We have a small fund for organizational development consulting. It's not a fortune, but it might help you transition into this work more substantially." They exchanged contact information, and Sarah left the conference feeling as if she had stepped into an entirely different future than the one she'd been planning just that morning. The drive home gave her time to process the day's developments and consider what expanding her work might mean for her family. That evening, as she helped Emma and Jake with homework, Sarah found herself explaining her work in new ways. "Remember when I started helping at the center?" she asked them. "Well, now other places want me to help them too." "Are you going to be famous?" Jake asked with the straightforward curiosity of a 9-year-old. "Not famous, honey, but maybe I can help more families like ours." Emma looked up from her reading worksheet. "Will you still have time for us?" The question cut straight to Sarah's deepest concern. Her previous job had been demanding, but predictable. This new path offered more flexibility, but also more uncertainty. She sat down between her children at the kitchen table. "Everything I do is so we can have a good life together. I will always make time for what matters most, which is you two." Over the following weeks, Sarah began taking on consulting projects while maintaining her base position at the food center. Her first external client was a homeless shelter that struggled with volunteer coordination and donation management. The work was familiar now, analyzing existing systems, identifying inefficiencies, and creating sustainable solutions. What surprised Sarah was how much she enjoyed the problem-solving aspect of the consulting work. Each organization presented unique challenges that required creative solutions. A women's shelter needed discreet intake procedures that protected client privacy while maintaining accurate records. A youth mentoring program needed systems for matching mentors with children based on interests and schedules, rather than just availability. The income from consulting work varied month to month, but it was consistently higher than her food center salary. More importantly, it allowed her to build expertise and reputation that seemed to open new doors regularly. Sarah began to understand that she wasn't just earning money. She was building a career based on her values and strengths. The transformation wasn't lost on the people around her. Mrs. Chen commented on how Sarah seemed to walk taller and smile more often. Lisa noticed that their phone conversations focused on Sarah's work successes rather than financial anxieties. Even David, during one of his infrequent visits with the children, remarked that Sarah seemed different. "You're more confident," he observed, not entirely approvingly. "This nonprofit work has changed you." "It's shown me what I'm capable of," Sarah replied without defensiveness. "And it's given me work that aligns with my values." David's expression suggested he didn't entirely understand the distinction, but Sarah no longer needed his approval or validation. Her sense of professional worth came from the impact she was making and the organizations that valued her contributions. The real test came when Dr. Williams called with a significant opportunity. The Regional United Way wanted to fund a comprehensive organizational development program for small nonprofits, and they wanted Sarah to design and lead it. The position would be part-time but well compensated, allowing her to maintain her consulting practice while providing steady income and benefits. It would mean less hands-on work at individual centers, but more influence on system-wide improvements, Dr. Williams explained. You'd be training other consultants and developing best practices that could help hundreds of organizations. The opportunity represented everything Sarah had worked toward: stable income, meaningful work, professional recognition, and the chance to amplify her impact. But it also meant stepping further away from direct service work and into administration and training roles. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists of pros and cons as she had learned to do in her accounting days. But the decision wasn't really about weighing options objectively. It was about choosing the path that would allow her to continue growing while staying true to the values that had guided her transformation. Emma found her there an hour later, still staring at her notes. "Are you making another big decision, Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart. A decision about my work." Emma climbed into the chair beside her and studied the legal pad seriously. "What do you want to do?" "I want to help more people, but I also want to make sure we have enough money and that I don't get so busy that I can't spend time with you and Jake." Emma nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable dilemma for a 7-year-old to consider. "Maybe you could try it and see if you like it." The simple suggestion cut through all of Sarah's complicated analysis. She didn't have to commit to this path forever. She just had to decide whether to try it and see where it led. After months of fearing uncertainty, she was learning to see it as possibility rather than threat. Sarah accepted the United Way position, and within 6 months her life had transformed beyond anything she could have imagined during those desperate early days of unemployment. She now managed a team of consultants who worked with nonprofit organizations across 3 counties, developed training programs that were being adopted in other states, and had been invited to speak at national conferences about innovative approaches to nonprofit management. The financial security that had seemed impossible to achieve was now stable and growing. Sarah had moved her family to a larger apartment with separate bedrooms for Emma and Jake, in a neighborhood with better schools and a small park where the children played after school. The constant anxiety about money had been replaced by the satisfying challenge of managing a budget that actually covered their needs and allowed for small luxuries. But success brought unexpected complications. Sarah found herself working longer hours than she had intended, traveling to conferences and client sites more frequently than she preferred, and struggling to maintain the work-life balance she had promised her children. The flexibility she had valued so highly in her early consulting days was being constrained by the demands of a growing program and increasing responsibilities. The tension came to a head on a Thursday evening in November. Sarah had promised to attend Jake's school play, but a crisis at one of her client organizations required immediate attention. A grant application deadline was approaching, and their financial records were in chaos that only Sarah seemed able to untangle quickly. She called Jake from her office, hearing the disappointment in his voice as she explained she would miss his performance. "But Mom, you promised. I'm the narrator. I have the most lines." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to you this weekend." "You said that last weekend too," Jake replied with the brutal honesty of a 10-year-old. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her office staring at spreadsheets that suddenly felt less important than they had moments before. She had fought so hard to provide financial security for her children that she was now struggling to provide the emotional presence they needed just as much. Maria, who had become both a mentor and friend, found Sarah still working at 8 o'clock that evening. "Go home, Sarah. Whatever this is, it will still be here tomorrow. This organization could lose a $50,000 grant if I don't get their financial report straightened out tonight. And your children could lose their mother if you don't remember what matters most." The gentle rebuke stung because it was accurate. Sarah had become so focused on professional success that she was replicating some of the same patterns that had contributed to her marriage's failure. She was present physically when she could be, but often distracted by work concerns that seemed urgent but weren't necessarily more important than her children's emotional needs. That night, Sarah had a difficult conversation with Emma and Jake about her work schedule and their feelings about her frequent absences. Emma, now 8 and increasingly perceptive, asked the question that cut deepest. "Mommy, do you like your work more than us?" "Of course not, Emma. I work hard so we can have a good life together." "But you're not together with us very much anymore," Jake pointed out. Their observations forced Sarah to examine whether her definition of success had shifted in ways that didn't serve her family's actual needs. They were financially secure now, but emotional security required her presence and attention, not just her income. Sarah spent the weekend thinking about how to restructure her professional commitments without abandoning the career she had worked so hard to build. She realized that her fear of financial insecurity was driving her to accept every opportunity, say yes to every request, and pack her schedule beyond sustainable limits. On Monday, she requested a meeting with Dr. Williams to discuss modifying her role. The conversation was more difficult than she anticipated because Dr. Williams had become accustomed to Sarah's availability and willingness to take on additional responsibilities. "Sarah, you're our most effective consultant. These organizations specifically request you for their projects. I'm honored by that confidence, but I need to create better boundaries. I have 2 children who need their mother to be present, not just successful." They negotiated a restructured arrangement that reduced Sarah's travel commitments and capped her weekly hours at 35. The adjustment meant slightly lower income, but Sarah had learned that earning enough was different from earning everything possible. The changes required Sarah to delegate more responsibilities to other consultants, which initially felt uncomfortable. She had grown accustomed to handling everything herself, partly from necessity during her early consulting days and partly from a desire to maintain control over quality. Training other consultants to use her methods and represent her approach turned out to be more rewarding than Sarah expected. Watching colleagues successfully implement systems she had developed gave her a different kind of professional satisfaction than doing all the work personally. 3 months after restructuring her schedule, Sarah was attending Jake's basketball game on a Tuesday afternoon when her phone buzzed with an urgent message from a client. Instead of immediately responding, she put the phone away and focused on watching her son play. The crisis could wait an hour while she celebrated Jake's successful free throw and Emma's enthusiastic cheering from the sidelines. After the game, as they walked to their car, Jake slipped his hand into hers. "Thanks for coming, Mom. It means a lot when you're actually here." The comment reminded Sarah why she had fought so hard to create stability for her family. It wasn't just about providing material security. It was about being present for the moments that mattered to her children. That evening, as Sarah responded to the client's urgent message, she realized it had resolved itself in her absence. The crisis that had seemed so critical during the basketball game had been managed by her colleague without requiring Sarah's immediate intervention. The discovery reinforced her growing understanding that her presence wasn't always as essential as she believed. Sarah began to recognize patterns in her work anxiety that echoed her earlier financial fears. Just as she had once feared that any missed job opportunity might be her last chance, she now worried that declining any professional request might damage her reputation or limit future opportunities. But her experience over the past year had demonstrated something different. The more clearly she defined her values and boundaries, the more respect she earned from colleagues and clients. Organizations valued her effectiveness more than her constant availability. The realization allowed Sarah to approach her work from a position of confidence rather than scarcity. She could choose projects that aligned with her strengths and interests rather than accepting everything that was offered. She could invest her time in developing long-term relationships with organizations rather than rushing from crisis to crisis. The shift in approach had unexpected benefits. Clients began to value her strategic advice more highly because it came from someone who took time to understand their unique challenges rather than someone frantically trying to solve every problem immediately. Her reputation grew, not because she was always available, but because she was consistently thoughtful and effective when she was engaged. Sarah also discovered that stepping back from some responsibilities created opportunities for other consultants to grow and develop their skills. Several colleagues credited her mentorship with helping them advance their careers, which gave Sarah a different kind of professional fulfillment than individual achievements. By winter, Sarah had found a sustainable rhythm that honored both her professional ambitions and her family commitments. She worked intensively during school hours, attended most of Emma and Jake's important events, and had established clear boundaries around evening and weekend availability, except for genuine emergencies. The balance wasn't perfect. There were still occasional conflicts between work demands and family needs, but Sarah had learned to navigate these situations with greater confidence and clarity about her priorities. She was no longer driven by fear of what might happen if she said no to opportunities, but motivated by intention about what kind of life she wanted to build. One evening in December, as Sarah helped Emma with a school project about careers, her daughter asked what had made her choose her current work. "I didn't really choose it at first," Sarah explained. "It chose me when I needed it most. But then I learned to shape it into something that works for our whole family." Emma considered this carefully. "So you made your job fit your life instead of making your life fit your job?" The 8-year-old had summarized something that had taken Sarah months to understand and implement. Success wasn't just about earning money or gaining recognition. It was about creating work that supported the life she wanted to live rather than consuming it. As the year ended, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed since those desperate months of unemployment. The transformation hadn't happened through a single dramatic breakthrough, but through a series of small decisions to approach challenges differently, to value purpose alongside profit, and to build relationships based on service rather than desperation. 2 years after starting her work at the food distribution center, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at a national nonprofit conference, delivering the keynote address about transforming organizational challenges into opportunities for community building. The audience included executives from major foundations, directors of charitable organizations, and government officials responsible for social services funding. But as she spoke about systems integration and volunteer optimization strategies, Sarah's mind kept drifting to a conversation she'd had that morning with Emma, now 10 years old and remarkably insightful about her mother's work. "Mom, do you ever miss when things were really hard?" Emma had asked over breakfast. The question had surprised Sarah. "Why would I miss that, sweetheart?" "Because that's when you figured out who you really wanted to be." Now, standing at the podium, Sarah realized her daughter had identified something profound. The period of desperate struggle had stripped away everything except what mattered most, forcing her to discover strengths she hadn't known she possessed and values she hadn't fully understood. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by representatives from 3 different organizations offering lucrative positions. A major foundation wanted her to direct their organizational development initiatives. A consulting firm offered partnership opportunities that would significantly expand her earning potential. A university proposed creating a program around her methodologies with Sarah as the founding director. Each opportunity represented the kind of professional recognition that would have seemed impossible during those months of unemployment. Yet, as Sarah listened to the proposals, she found herself evaluating them not just against her career ambitions, but against the life she had worked so hard to build for her family. The foundation position would require relocating to another state. The consulting partnership would demand extensive travel. The university opportunity would provide stability and prestige, but would move her away from direct community service work. "These are incredible opportunities," Sarah told each representative. "Honestly, can I take some time to consider how they might fit with my current commitments?" On the flight home, Sarah reflected on how different her response would have been 2 years earlier. Desperation would have made her say yes to any opportunity that offered security, regardless of whether it aligned with her values or family needs. Now she had the luxury of choice, and she understood that luxury came with the responsibility to choose wisely. Emma and Jake met her at the airport with Lisa, who had become more involved in their lives as Sarah's career had stabilized. During the drive home, Jake excitedly described a science project he'd been working on, while Emma shared details about a community service project her class was organizing. "We're collecting books for kids who don't have many at home," Emma explained. "I told my teacher about the place where you used to work, and she wants our class to visit." Sarah smiled, realizing that her children had absorbed lessons about community service and social responsibility not through lectures, but through observing her work and its impact. They understood intuitively that people helped each other, not because they had to, but because that's what created the kind of world worth living in. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat in her living room reviewing the offers she'd received. Each represented a different path forward, a different balance of income, prestige, and personal fulfillment. But as she considered her options, Sarah realized the decision wasn't really about choosing between opportunities. It was about staying true to the principles that had guided her transformation. She picked up her phone and called Maria, who had become one of her closest friends and most trusted advisors. "Sarah, how was the conference?" "Incredible and overwhelming." "Maria, I need to talk through some decisions." As Sarah described the various opportunities, Maria listened without immediately offering advice. When Sarah finished, Maria was quiet. For a moment. "What does your gut tell you?" Maria finally asked. "That I don't want to lose what I've built here. The work, the community, the balance with my kids. But I also don't want to miss opportunities that could help me reach more people. Maybe the question isn't which opportunity to choose, but how to create the opportunity that fits exactly what you want." The suggestion resonated immediately. Sarah had spent 2 years learning to create solutions rather than just accepting existing options. Why should career decisions be any different? Over the following weeks, Sarah began developing a counter-proposal that combined elements from all the offers while maintaining her commitment to local community work. She proposed creating a national training institute based in her current city, with partnerships that would allow her to influence policy and practice nationwide while staying rooted in direct service work. The proposal was ambitious and untested, requiring coordination between multiple organizations and funding sources, but Sarah's track record of successful innovation gave her credibility with potential partners, and her clear vision of how the pieces would fit together convinced skeptics that the plan was viable. 6 months later, the Community Impact Institute opened with Sarah as its executive director. The organization provided training and consultation to nonprofit organizations across the country, while maintaining demonstration programs that kept staff connected to direct service work. Sarah could influence national conversations about community development while still volunteering at the local food center where her transformation had begun. The Institute's opening ceremony was held at the same community center where Sarah had first discovered her capacity for organizational innovation. Representatives from foundations, universities, and government agencies mingled with local volunteers, families who had received services, and community members who had watched Sarah's journey from desperate job seeker to national expert. During her remarks at the ceremony, Sarah looked out at an audience that represented all the different phases of her journey. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Lisa held Emma's hand while Jake fidgeted nearby, proud but slightly overwhelmed by the attention. Maria stood with other food center volunteers, representing the community that had first believed in Sarah's potential. 3 years ago, I thought, success meant finding someone who would hire me, Sarah told the audience. I've learned that real success means creating work that serves both your community and your soul, that provides not just for your family's financial needs but for their need to see their parent living with purpose and integrity. After the ceremony, as Sarah was cleaning up, Emma approached with a serious expression. "Mom, are you going to be too busy again now?" The question reminded Sarah that success meant maintaining the values and priorities that had guided her transformation, not abandoning them as she achieved recognition. She knelt down to Emma's eye level. "The whole point of creating this institute is so I can do important work while still being the mom you and Jake need me to be. If it stops working for our family, we'll change it." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting the promise but clearly prepared to hold her mother accountable. As they walked to their car that evening, Jake slipped his hand into Sarah's. "Mom, are we rich now?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Their financial security was solid, their community ties were strong, and her work provided both personal fulfillment and social impact. Emma walked on her other side, chattering about plans for showing her friends around the new institute. "Yes, Jake," Sarah replied. "We're very rich, just not in the way I used to think about being rich." Looking back, Sarah could see how each crisis and setback had been necessary preparation for what came next. The unemployment that had seemed like a disaster had forced her to discover strengths and values she might never have accessed otherwise. The period of financial desperation had taught her to distinguish between needs and wants, between security and excess. The struggle to balance work and family had shown her that success without purpose was ultimately hollow. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that love, for her children, for her community, for meaningful work, was indeed the most powerful weapon against despair and limitation. When everything else failed, when conventional approaches offered no solutions, love had provided both the motivation to keep trying and the wisdom to find new paths forward.